My name is Ian Wright. I'm the founder and CEO of the Disruptive Innovators Network, and I'm going to be your host, stroke chair MC for the next 90 minutes or so. And I'm delighted to sort of see so many people register and come on board for this session. It's the second one in a series of thought leadership research pieces that the Disruptive Innovators Network have done with Campbell, Tickell, and we've worked very, very hard to try and pick up, I suppose, some topical issues that perhaps aren't getting either the attention they deserve or getting the answers to what you as leaders are actually needing within your organisation. So this is the second one, as I say, and this was looking at new and emerging operating models that were coming through from 22, because I think there's no doubt that we are still living in a great experiment within the social housing sector. We don't have all of the answers yet, but hopefully through this session, and if you've managed to download and read the full report that was published last week, you've hopefully got some good ideas and insights into how different organisations, different leaders are addressing some of the challenges that we've got. And again, it would be lovely to get your feedback on any of the issues contained within that the report, because it did cover a lot more than what we're going to cover just in this session. I think the key thing for me around this is that we are going to have to sort of test and learn, and some of the things that we're doing now from an operating model perspective probably will change in a year's time, because they're no longer sort of fit for purpose. And I think that's one of the things that's really struck me about where the sector actually is and where we are as leaders at this moment in time. The skills, the talent, and what got us to where we were pre-COVID is not what we are going to need to get out of this. And I think that's probably, if you're a leader, this is probably going to be one of the biggest challenges that you face, is how can you manage to do that and change the organisation whilst continuing to deliver business as usual services, whilst taking the whole organisation with you. And I think that's going to be a big challenge, and I'm sure some of our contributors will have a view on that. So that's the welcome from myself. I'm now going to pass over to Alistair Sharpe-Neal, who is my co-conspirator in sort of making this this all happen. And Alistair's compiled a top 10 of key report findings, recommendations, just to sort of get us started in terms of where our elements of focus will be. So Alistair, the screen is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Ian. Good morning, everyone. My name's Alistair Sharpe-Neal. I'm a senior consultant with Campbell, Tickell. On behalf of Campbell, Tickell, welcome to this briefing on new operating models. Thank you to all the report contributors, and in particular to our three panelists, Kate, Ben and Jonathan. Now, the delegate list for today reveals a wide spectrum of participant organisations. We have housing providers, local authorities, charities and third sector organisations. Obviously, each of you face very specific operating challenges. You have very different strengths and weaknesses within your current as-is operating models, and you obviously have very different aspirations for them moving forward. However, as Ian said, COVID has been a real leveller, and as one of our other contributors observes, it's provoked the largest social experiment for many decades. It's been all hands to the pump, it's been unscripted, it's really tested the resilience of individuals, teams and services to the full. But hopefully, as we emerge from COVID, we have a unique opportunity. We have a common reset point, both individually and collectively, to refocus, to regroup, to respond to the ever-increasing demand for housing and the complexity of support needs. So the question we're posing to you as sector leaders is this: how do you build flexibility and resilience into your operating models that benefits your customers? Already, we're hearing a new lexicon to describe operating models: hybrid, flexible, resilient, agile, sustainable, enabling. Whilst many of these are sort of well-established aspirations, they somehow now feel more real, more tangible. However, they describe a sort of a destination or target operating model with very little clue as how to reach them. Certainly not in the way that our old friend transformation has, albeit with its significant price tag, 2-year timeline, and its patchy record on hitting a moving target. Rare that those are. So exactly how do we use COVID as a catalyst to evolve operating models to the benefit of our customers? In summarising the learning from the interviews, it's clear that organisations are looking at this and looking at their operating models from three perspectives. Firstly, from a customer perspective, in listening to and reconnecting, rebuilding relationships. Secondly, from an organisational perspective, realigning services more closely with customer need and rethinking the value of local presence. And thirdly, in unlocking new service responses through digital innovation and partnership working. Now, listening to and understanding customer need is central to the success of any commercial enterprise, whereas sadly in the housing sector, this customer focus has been sort of somewhat neglected, and it's required a combination of regulation and expose to place the customer voice center stage. Clearly, reinvestment in the customer relationship is needed. For Viva, for instance, they recognize that to close this relationship gap deficit, investment is needed in local presence and upskilling customer-facing roles. And whilst it will cost more in the short term, in the longer term, it will enable a more proactive solution to be provided at a sustainable cost. Taking this a step further, within her piece, Kate draws out wider themes of building long-term relationships to increase resilience and community empowerment. Equally, the sector's got a really sort of mixed record on using customer data to deliver both insight and foresight, whether to plan and tailor services, to drive real-time interventions, or to measure service impact. Therefore, building a new housing business by first establishing a robust data architecture is groundbreaking, as Ben will explain in his piece. Next, from an organisational perspective, how do you wrap services around the customer and re-establish this local presence whilst operating sustainably and driving innovation? Here are innovative examples from 3 housing associations. At Johnny Johnson, they're repurposing their headquarters as homes, creating innovation hubs to bring staff back together and empowering them to co-design how the organisation will operate moving forward. At Abry, they're building a hub and spoke model with support and control still retained at the centre, but with an emphasis placed on staff working from local touchdown spaces. At Lorraburn, they're implementing an operating model that actively contributes to the sustainability of communities in which they operate and where their staff live. They're adopting a set of Being You flexible working standards with the aim of creating a more diverse workforce and ultimately improving outcomes for customers. However, this new sort of a new set of challenges emerges within this sort of hybrid working model, in that how do you recruit, develop, retain staff, and most importantly, ensure their ongoing welfare and well-being with the blurring of lines between home and work. For example, staff working within the almost globally remote working environment at Plantific are supported to understand and feel the difference between working and living at home. Equally, you may have to think out of the box or the toolbox, as is the case at Soho Housing, where they're creating local apprenticeship schemes to plug the gaps in the contractor supply chain, which is a win both for the business and the local community. Now, a question posed to us in advance of this session is, how do I go about transformation? Well, don't transform, evolve instead. Make ownership of innovation and change everyone's responsibility, create the right mindset, a free from failure culture, and just encourage people to get on with it. This approach is being used at Believe Housing, where there's no plan to return to what we all call business as usual. Finally, let's look at how services can be delivered within these new operating models. Reimagining how a service is delivered, digital from start to finish, whilst remaining inclusive, improving customer experience, and removing inefficiency and cost may seem daunting. But look at the motor trade. Want to buy a car online? Yeah, kazoo you can. Just cinch it. Housing, however, is a sector that's been pretty poorly supported by intelligent business systems and technology. It's therefore been slow to respond to the potential of digital shift. But Jonathan and Ben will both highlight disruptive approaches to delivering digital solutions that unlock benefits both for the customer and the provider. Organizations are also reassessing their core purposes, asking fundamental questions of themselves. What is our role? Where do we fit in the social value chain? Where do we deliver? Where do we partner, commission, signpost, or advocate? How can we best empower the individuals and customers and communities we all serve? But now is no time to retrench. Operating models built on open, value-add partnerships are critical if we're to deliver the sort of whole systems approaches we need to meet the housing, health, social care and support challenges we face as a nation. In conclusion, COVID clearly provides us with a unique opportunity to refocus, to rethink our approach, to re-energize, but above all, to innovate in a way that reconnects with and better serves their customers. I think that future operating models will evolve based on clear understanding of need and shared aspiration, delivered through flexible, data-driven operations and networks of value-added partnerships, with investment, innovation, reconnection with community and trust in staff the key enablers. So I hope this introduction has set the scene, sort of rung some bells, highlighted opportunities to you, but most of all, whetted your appetite for the presentations to follow. Back to you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Alistair. And hopefully, as I say, you can read a bit more about those top 10 key takeaways in the full report to sort of just add a little bit more context to some of the points and re-emphasize the ones that Alistair sort of talked about there. Just some sort of, I suppose, some insights that we've come across at DIN in this particular space, because the first finding is around sort of innovation, and had a very interesting discussion with a large housing organisation who decided that basically they didn't have time for innovation because they were too busy delivering the day job. And I think part of the challenge that you have as leaders is that how do you provide that space, that ability to stop working in the business and look upwards and outwards from your organization? This is going to be one of the key things you're going to have to find time for within your organization, because as another organization who said they were moving on said, well, we did innovation last year. The home is a really interesting thing. I mean, I don't know whether you've sort of been purchasing a car sort of recently, and the problems and delays of sort of getting one delivered. You're probably not aware, but actually, you know, the manager of your local garage probably knows far more about your car than what you do about a much bigger asset in your home. There are something like 3,000 microprocessors in a typical family car, providing and sending data back. In a typical family home, there's less than 100. So in any year, well, I think there's about 500 million minutes, we probably know at any one time less than 0.0002% of how our asset is actually sort of performing. So we're going to need a mind shift in the way that we look at these sort of things, because as Alistair pointed out, data is not something as a sector we have a particular strength in. As one CEO referred it to me the other week, you know, we like feasting on a diet of turkey Twizzler data. You know, we get full from it, but it's not necessarily anything nutritious or useful to us. The other point around sustainability as well is a lot of organizations are now looking at the way we go forward. It's making sure that it doesn't go forward in a way that it's siloed, or at least you join up the different silos that you've got. As big organizations, your businesses are contributing to climate change in a significant way, not just from the built environment. So it's not just from your housing asset. There are so many other ways that are coming out. IT is a particular way that we need to sort of be mindful of as well. So, you know, there's going to have to be a lot of thought mapping into that. And speaking of strategies, I don't know whether we saw there was a survey in Inside Housing last week about how many organizations have actually got a digital strategy. And I think that was quite enlightening, that a lot of organizations know the need to have one, but don't actually have one at this moment in time, or are unsure how to actually go about that. And yet technology is going to be one of those things that's helped us enormously and helped your tenants and residents enormously during the pandemic. So, we are going to need to sort of focus on developing the right digital strategy for us. So that's the introduction over with. I'm now going to introduce our first speaker, which is the wonderful Kate Wareing from Soha down in Oxfordshire, down there. And Kate's going to kick us off looking at lessons from international development in terms of building resilience and customer relations and what we can sort of learn from there. So, Kate, do you want to vocalise your contribution to this research?
Thanks very much, Ian, and thank you for calling me wonderful. I think that's a very lovely way to start the day. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for your time. It's a slightly provocative thing to do to begin a presentation by talking about lessons from a different sector. So I will begin by apologising for doing that and then tell you a little bit about why. So I'm Chief Exec at Soha Housing Association. We have about 20,000 residents and about 7,000 homes. We're in a very high cost area of the country where it's expensive to live. And we're mostly known, I think, more broadly across the sector for being one of only 7 mutually owned associations. So we are community rooted, we are owned by about 700 of our residents and about 70 of our staff. They are our shareholders. They get to make the really big decisions for our organisation, and they're who our board is accountable to. And that makes us legally structured in a way that honours the very long-term values of the association, which have always been about really putting residents at the heart of our decision-making processes, giving them real power and influence across the organisation. So I've been there for 3.5 years. I spent about 10 years before that working in international development organisations. And while I was working for international development, I also chaired a housing association. And now I'm back working for a housing association. I'm on the board of an international development organisation. So I've always been quite interested in these sort of points of crossover and these synergies. And they've become all the more relevant in the last couple of years as we've moved into a really different space as a country. One where we haven't really been able to think as far forward as we've been used to, where we've experienced real crisis and really not known what was going to happen next. And that is something that most of us as a country, we haven't been used to. Although many individuals within our country, and probably every single person on this call to some extent, will have experienced that personally themselves. So obviously what international development does is work in an awful lot of areas of the world which are experiencing volatility that we haven't really seen that much of to date. Pre-pandemic, it tends to have gone in longer cycles in our country. And so I think this is quite a sort of a sensible time really to look across the two sectors and think both about what we have learnt, what's been able to inform learning for the last couple of years, but really importantly, what informs learning now as we move out of what I would call the acute phase of the pandemic response. At least this is where I touch some wood. Hopefully we're moving out of the acute phase of the pandemic response and into the long-term economic impacts of the pandemic, how those are shared across society, and effectively how we rebuild, hopefully learning lessons from the good that's emerged in the last 2 years, as well as trying to move forward from some of the trauma and the long-term scarring effectively that has resulted from the last 2 years as well. So that's why this, and I'm really going to focus on what a housing association is for, which is a little bit abstract. I promised to get to the how part as well, but I'm sure that my colleagues will then be building much more on the operating models piece, and I'm more than happy to pick more of that up in conversation later on at the end of our presentations. So can I ask you to move me on to my next slide, please? And this is where I get to have my Chris Whitty moment. Thank you. My slides are not beautiful. This is because they are harvested from slides I took with me as I've moved on from organisations. So they're old, pre-visuals being beautiful, and they were also made by international development organisations on tight budgets. So please excuse my slides, but hopefully they'll do their job. So the first one of these is a model. I used to run Oxfam's UK poverty programme, and whilst doing that, worked very closely with an organisation called Church Action on Poverty. And this was a slide that the two groups put together, really pulling on a principle that is part of the lexicon in international development called the Livelihoods Ladder. Basically, it said that all people have a certain amount of luck and current circumstance, which can be mapped onto this scale. So for many people, life is a constant battle. People are surviving the bottom of this scale. Very, very vulnerable to external shocks. It's very easy for people to be chucked off course. And then as life gets better, people move into what could be called a coping system. So you're just about getting by. You're able to cope with minor change, minor shocks, but not major ones. But there's a little bit of resilience there, this word that I'm going to keep using. When things get better than that, you move to adapting. Someone has just started cleaning my windows, so if there's background noise, I apologise. It's absolutely classic. And adapting is when you can really start to think forward. You can rely on things being reasonably secure, and hopefully carry on reasonably well. This will be fast. And then when life gets really good, you end up in what's called accumulating territory. You're starting to think much further ahead. So I think this is something that really resonates with each of us individually, particularly because of what we've just been through. So I've been mostly quite lucky in my life for the last 20 years or so, which means I've been thinking about exciting topics from a personal perspective, like how to pay for my kids' education, getting them off to university, saving up for retirement, all those sorts of things. But if you think about the beginning of the pandemic, it was, where's the shopping coming from next week? Will I actually be able to feed my family next month? What's happening in a much, much shorter time frame? This leads me to one of my my wishes for us, which is that we start to measure this stuff. I think one of our jobs, an awful lot of our residents are not homogenous, but many of our residents come to us after some form of crisis in their lives and are definitely in the struggling box for starters. And as people get more secure and more stable and can have more things to rely on, one of which is a secure home, they get the opportunity to start to rebuild. And so the metric that I think is really useful to us, because it helps measure what are often very intangible things with a number, is how far ahead can I plan? Because if you ask me as an individual, when life is bad, I'm looking to the end of next week or next month or next year. When life is good, I'm thinking about 20 years. Most of the time it's somewhere in the middle. But I mean, that is a really helpful, just simple measure that tells people whether or not we're in crisis or coming out of it. Can I have my next slide, please? This is the most important slide I'm going to show you today. So for people to be okay, they need a range of things in their lives. They need they need physical stuff. And the one that's most important in our world is a home, a physical asset, a home. It might also be a car or a sewing machine, but it's something that they're the objects that you need in order to be okay. You also need, top left, financial assets. You need enough income. And we all need money to pay the bills. Top right, you need your human assets. You need skills, education, self-confidence, motivation. They're the things that enable you often to gain your income. And I put health in that basket as well, actually, because you need the security of remaining well. Now, as housing associations, we tend to concentrate mostly on physical assets and on financial assets. We put quite a lot of time and money and thought into helping support residents to get income and supporting residents into work. But the other two are really important as well. We need public assets. We need to be able to rely on access to services. And if public assets are strong, you can rely on those alongside what you have individually. And I think most importantly of all, we need social assets. We need friends, we need communities, we need people we can rely on who'll pick us up when our lives fall over. Families, neighbours who'll help you out when the childcare goes under. Those sort of social assets. If you could move me on, please. So this is a slightly strange diagram. I'm about to explain it. And if we go on to another slide, this is my life. At least it's the bits of it I'm prepared to share on a webinar with 100 participants. So basically, the idea with this is that everybody's life has times when it's okay, above the line, and not okay, below the line. Now, what we tend to think about a lot is what goes wrong in people's lives. And I'm about to show you another slide that will show you what I mean. We tend to think about what's gone wrong. Now, I'm not going to run you through my entire life. It's a bit like oversharing, but we'll do the first one of these. So the first one of these lumps that I'll choose to share is the end of a relationship, something that's very common, happens to almost all of us. Now, the end of the relationship plummeted a pretty steep decline for me from okay to not okay, in which I also lost my home, had to move town. Lots of things went horribly wrong, but it stopped bottom of this little circle. and things started to get better again. And I managed to move back into a home. I managed to get back on my feet. Not everything fell over as a result of that relationship ending. What we often do, particularly in support work, is concentrate on what's gone wrong. The loss of the job, the loss of the home, the drug or alcohol issue. What I think we underthink about is what's enabled things to stop getting worse and help people rebuild. And that's where I think relationships, society, family, and often decent social services often kick in. So just move on to my next slide. So this is out of date, but one thing I've done in my past was set up the Supporting People programme for Oxfordshire. These were the metrics we used to judge housing related support services by in 2010, 2011. I think it's moved on a bit. But if I, as a human being, look at myself on that little diagram, I am a series of problems. And if I actually have a conversation based on that last diagram, I'm someone who's experienced problems, but I'm also someone who's got things I've drawn on when things have been tough. So take me off slide, pop me on speaker if you can, please. What does all of that lot mean? I think it means three things. I think it means if we're serious about helping people rebuild after a period when a lot of people have been through trauma and a lot of people are much, much closer to survival than they ever were and are about to experience hard times, we have to think more broadly about our role. And I think it's about thinking about that social asset space, how we help people know people who they can rely on when times are tough, and also how we help people lobby for the strengthening and the retention of the social asset space, that access and right to decent public services. So the core delivery of the service goes without saying. That has to be what we always do well, but this is about what else we do as landlords. I also think the final point, really, we have to recognise our own financial strength. We're an organisation that generates a surplus of 7 million a year. We are the only organisation in Oxfordshire with that amount of money to choose how to spend. That's not to say there aren't an awful lot of competing pressures for what we spend it on. We can talk an awful lot about those, I'm sure, but one of those means we can divert money to meet short-term need away from long-term investment, but we have to do it thoughtfully. So my final message from international development, I sat on a management team responsible for Oxfam's humanitarian response globally and long-term development programme globally. What we've just been through is as close as I hope our country ever gets to a humanitarian crisis. What we're in now is long-term development mode. We're back into how do we rebuild our economy? How do we invest properly in public services? And how do we support the people who are going to have been worst impacted by the shock that we've all just experienced to rebuild as strongly and as resiliently as possible in the future? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Brilliant summary there and some really useful insights. Sometimes we have to be reminded of things, and it was great for you to take us back to sort of the time of sort of supporting people, which was I suppose a time within the sector where there was a lot of housing plus kind of sort of support for people, and ultimately that's what we're in. We're in the people business around that. I also like the point around actually really understanding the problems that we're trying to solve. And do we really need to do more work to understand that? I think, as Alistair said in the beginning, for housing are going back to investing in more expensive, but in the long term, better value for the business or better impact for business in having housing officers, patch officers coming back to these sort of things. So I think that was really, really helpful there. One quick question for me that sort of came up, and when you were talking about the business and the operating model that you've got within South Oxfordshire, is particularly with it being tenant owned, is I am not sure whether tenants in the sector are, and this might be quite challenging, but are still the customers now. I get a sense that actually it's the regulator who is the customer now, and we seem to be sort of drifting more towards making sure we satisfy that. And so I just wondered what your views were in terms of the customer lens and the customer view. Where do you see that within Soha?
Well, I think the regulator's coming back round again, to be honest. So the time when I was least comfortable about it was when the emphasis was all on maximising surplus for the development of new homes at the expense of security of tenure and the expense of social rented properties, just driving money effectively out of the customer, the resident base, and really retrenching back on anything that was seen as non-core service provision. I think the white paper's sending the cycle back round a bit, actually. But one thing that I checked out before I joined Soha, and it's been really good at doing, and I think it's because it's got so much resident involvement, is it's always been very true to that core sense of itself. It's never flip properties from social to affordable rent. It's never done away with security of tenure. And it's ridden out the political waves when that was what the pressure was there to do. I think they're coming back round again. I think the focus on consumer standards, the focus on resident voice, the focus on making sure people are treated with respect is meaning that the tension between the two competing audiences is not as acute. I think one of the real tensions is between the people who are already housed and the people who are sitting on the waiting lists. But the people who think about that the most, to be honest, are often our residents who have themselves, until very recently, experienced what it was like not to be securely housed.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Kate. We'll come back to you when we do the panel, and we're now going to bring in the brilliant Jonathan Gregory, who has particularly enjoyed reading his piece about digital disruption and where the role of technology can play in future operating models. So the screen is yours, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, and welcome and good morning, everybody. Bit of an introduction of me. So I'm Jonathan Gregory, and actually this year I've been in housing 20 years. That to me makes me feel like I'm a very old man, but I realise that for some people that makes me just a baby in the sector. But a lot has happened in 20 years. I've worked in a lot of different organisations and seen an awful lot of situations similar to what we all have. When I first came into housing in 2002, and prior to which I was in supported housing and residential social care. I used to run children's homes, remand units, stuff like that. But when I came into housing, I worked for East Thames. And I liked working for East Thames. But like so many organisations at that time, they had just gone through a programme of closing area offices. And ever since that moment, I came in and thought, why have you done that? And I was educated as to why that had happened. And this was the movement of the sector. Operating models were changing and being spoken about back then. The irony of it is that ever since that day, everyone has been talking about how do we reach our tenants more? How do we make ourselves more visible? How do we make ourselves more available to residents and hear their voice more clearly? It's like, well, we've closed all the area offices. You know, things like that are very difficult for disruptive innovation even to help us combat that. So my presentation this morning is really going to be about remarks and thoughts that I've picked up over 20 years. And I'm hoping that will be helpful and useful and challenging. And these are the things I remind myself every single day, trying to improve services in the way that I know we all genuinely in the sector want to do so, but we get a bit caught up with ourselves and what the game is all about. There are some people, I think, on this webinar who I've worked with, and it's great to see and know that you guys are here. If you've got any bad memories of me, please keep them to yourselves. Don't show me up in front of everybody. I've been working with and through Campbell Tickell since I left East Thames back in 2008. So I think that's 14 years this year. And I've worked for a wide range of housing associations, large and small, ALMOs, local authorities. And I also do work with charities, do a lot of mentoring and coaching, mediation, working through EDI issues, etc. So quite a wide range of experience there. Now, look at my first slide. This is deliberately old school. Because when I really sit down and think about innovation, I think, what have we already invented or innovated that we just don't use properly? And I'm afraid that is something that really does pervade what we do. So what I wanted to do first was just to remind people that we have already been disrupted. You know, let's not talk about disruption as it's something that can only come tomorrow or next week or the week after. All of our lives have been disrupted. Smartphones, cloud-based software, customer relationship systems, AI systems for call centers, particularly where you've got large volumes of calls, and the computer will actually answer it for you and present itself as a human being. It's not flawless, but can certainly help with dealing with high volumes of calls. PDAs for frontline staff, housing officers, maintenance operatives, caretakers. These things have transformed, and I'm using that word quite deliberately, our understanding. But really and truly, when you look at the computing power that we have in our hands these days via smartphones, and most of us maybe can remember the days of the Ericssons and the Blackberries that led us to where we are now, the world has changed hugely. And then we've constantly, since, I don't know, what, the last 10, 15 years, tried to engage with our residents digitally, particularly through portals. Some of us have created apps and so on and so forth. But the fact is, a lot of disruption has already happened. We need to remember that and be respectful of that and aware of it. Next slide, please. So what has all that disruption already done for us? Well, yeah, it's given us much better speed in accessing information. It's given us more customer insight, but I think the point that was made earlier about whether the data we've got is nutritionally of value and not just something that fills us up quickly is a great analogy. I think we can all nod along and think, yeah, I kind of know what that means. We've now got information everywhere. You know, if you're in a tenant's home, if you're out on an estate, wherever you are, that information is potentially at your fingertips. We've been working remotely for the last 2 years. We all know this. And all of these disruptive innovations have led us to be able to respond to the pandemic as well as the sector generally did. And nobody was more surprised than me. And I was working in Homes for Haringey at the time. And if you'd have given me the project and said, could you move us all to remote working? I'd have said, that's probably a 2-year project by the time we've done the consultation and assessed everyone's homes. We did it in 2 weeks. And I tell you what, that was the biggest lesson of the pandemic for me. Something that I thought would have taken 2 years, took 2 weeks with the right motivation. Sadly, we were all scared to death. That's really what motivated it. Approval routes were subverted and made more real. We listed decisions that we'd taken in order to ratify them more formally later, but it was actually quite incredible. And I really think as a sector, we should not lose the great work and thinking that we did. And I have to be honest, I can see where as a sector, we're moving back and moving back and moving back because we've kind of forgotten the fear, you know, and we need to stop for a moment, I think, and really think about that. And of course, if our systems are being maintained properly, we've got up-to-date information, which we know is important. Many organisations have been scanning files for years so that everything that we've got on a resident or a household is at our fingertips, which is often most used to our frontline staff. So when we are talking about remote working, we're talking about well-being, we are talking about how these very systems actually help and improve the welfare of staff. We've got a very, very difficult job on the ground, and I think it's about relating it to that. Next slide, please. But look, what has this innovation not done for us? There are some things that we cannot replace with innovation easily. A proper understanding of individuals' vulnerability and needs. This is really becoming king now. And when it comes to target operating models, bottom line is we need to go back to basics. It's almost boring. We've all heard each other say this so many times. There's nothing new in this, but by very definition, there is nothing new in this. We need to get back out there and start talking to people and sitting with them in their homes and really understanding the nuance of the problem. Just recently, I mean, I'm currently, I should have said, sorry, I'm currently interim chief exec at IDS, Industrial Dwelling Society, a housing association based in Tottenham, operating about 6 London boroughs. And we had a situation just recently where a resident actually called one of our housing officers and alerted him to the fact that he had a guest in his house that was abusing him psychologically. And our housing officer picked up on the tone of the voice, went round there as if to carry out a casual, oh, hello, Mr. Jones, name has been changed, obviously. Hello, Mr. Jones, how are you doing today? In order to intervene in that situation, called the police. It was a fantastic piece of work that no computer could ever have done. And that potentially really saved that man from a very, very unpleasant situation. A great example of how that can be used. What I'm saying is a large percentage of our job is social contact, not with all of our residents. Probably 20–30% is probably the target for most of us in terms of people who need that kind of contact. But again, no systems are going to replace that. Didn't give us a complete and sufficient knowledge of our housing conditions. We are still having properties that tip up. There's sewage flowing out the front door. Hoppers have got blocked and we just somehow missed it, and there's decorations being ruined and leaks internally. I'm not sure there's ever going to be a computer system or a piece of innovation that solves that one. We are going to need to continue to invest in our staff on the ground. On the ground knowledge of neighbourhoods. Well, you can only know a neighbourhood by walking around it. We all know that. And it changes week to week, day to day, hour to hour sometimes, particularly in school holidays and at other key times. Yeah. We will never replace our eyes and ears. Typically our caretakers, maintenance operatives and others, neighbours, all sorts of people, never is going to get replaced by a system. And these are the basics of a target operating model, i.e. knowing what's going on in our households, what's going on with our properties and what's going on in our estates. And then there's all the other stuff that falls between the gaps, the look and feel of a place that impacts on residents and staff. You know, there's nothing more demoralising for staff than to wander around their estates where stuff hasn't been fixed for years and they're not really, really clear where that money's gone and what the investment is. Yeah, all of those things are very, very difficult to replace systems for. We need to know how people are actually using the buildings. No matter what our asset management systems say, it's about what our eyes and ears tell us. Actually, do you realise that's when that gets used, or this or that, or whatever it may well be? There are so many wider factors impacting on our stock, and we need to bring those all together. The other thing that's not on here, but really should be, is partnerships. Again, most of us have probably got maintenance contracts and things like that in place, partnerships with other third sector organisations to get certain areas of the work addressed. Technology won't do all that for us. It might help, it might inform, and it might link us up, but actually good partnership and negotiation and give and take is actually also what will make our target operating models successful. So I'm starting off by saying, forget tech for a moment. Let's look at cleaning our own house and getting ourselves in order to prepare ourselves for how innovation and tech can really help our operating models and methods. Let's face it, some things never change. Some things never change. Let me give you some examples. The toilet. I don't think the toilet has changed since it was invented, bar one or two specialist ones, perhaps for disability or for really, really rich people. Nobody's ever running around saying, oh, it's about how we invented a new type of toilet. We don't, we get on with it. Ovens. You know, these are things we use all day, every day. Yes, they might have digital. Yes, mine says it's self-cleaning. It isn't. I don't know about that. Shovels, musical instruments. Yes, they might get modernized, but at their heart, they're the same thing. Strings and bows, wind and pressing buttons. A piano has essentially not really changed since it changed from the harpsichord, actually. I was in a restaurant the other day. There was a birthday party. First time I'd ever seen a balloon inside a balloon. Now, look, you guys might have lots of parties. You might have children. I don't have children, so I never knew that. I was amazed. I didn't think the balloon had been innovated. A rock balloon inside a balloon. I was so impressed. They didn't like me asking about it, but the teddy bear, you know, and even PowerPoint. I mean, we can probably all remember the days of overhead projectors. That was a long time ago. But is anything ever going to replace PowerPoint, or is this it for life? I don't know. It works. Even in this remote world and Zoom and everything else, it works really well. So
2 minutes, Jonathan. 2 minutes.
Okay. Just wanted to make that point. Just moving on to the next slide then. Beware transformation. One of my great colleagues, John Slade, who also works for Campbell, said, we need to be aware that we're not just wrapping a new digital skin around old practice. And that's a real key challenge for us. Yeah. Integration is one of the most important things. And in most organizations that I've been to, integration of the systems we've already innovated with is not right. So things are disconnected between asset management, housing management, finance, and that's what causes an awful lot of the lack of space to deal with our current business to give us the time to innovate. I'll move on to the next slide. One of the key things I remember every day is that we are very good, not just in housing, but in other sectors as well, of going through transformation programs that don't really quite hit the button. And all we're really doing is describing the water to a drowning man. And our frontline staff often feel this way. I really urge us all to beware of just constantly describing the water to drowning people, but actually what they really need is our help and our solutions. If we move on then to what some of the good transformations I've seen over the last few years, we have companies like Vuba, and I've been working with them to develop their offer to social housing. This is all about providing housing professionals, property professionals all around the country, 24/7 to do lettings, property inspections, vulnerability checks, tenancy verifications, you name it. Great additional tech platform resource to add to our existing resources. Very, very useful. Plentific, as we know, provides a platform for maintenance and repair services and contractors, and they are very effective in what they do. Switchy, organisations that provide boilers and sensors and ways of monitoring repairs, damp, mould and condensation in properties remotely, back at the ranch. Really useful information that helps us deal with the basics even better. I don't know if you've heard of a company called Alcove. They're out there, they've been out there for a while. They provide phenomenal assistive technology, particularly to elders and people with vulnerabilities, disabilities, right the way from visual screens where you can talk to people directly through to using things like Ring doorbells and other technology. And some of these technologies are a bit controversial, but nonetheless, we shouldn't be afraid to explore them more fully. Alexa pretty much can run everything these days. And I know of some organizations where they've been using Alexa quite effectively. It's a bit hit and miss in some ways, but these are the things that are already with us that we can combine to great effect. And also organisations like Fixflow that are all about online repairs and ordering. So those are some of the suggestions that I would have about fixing our house, preparing ourselves for real transformation, and some of the ideas and things that might be available to us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Jonathan. One quick question before I bring Ben on. I mean, you'll be familiar with sort of Amara's law, which is basically we tend to sort of overestimate the impact of technology in the short term, but underestimate it sort of in the longer term. I just wondered, from your expertise in the sort of this digital space, what are the kind of technology you think actually these are the ones I would focus on? These are the ones that actually, you know, they'll probably be gone within a relatively short sort of space of time.
I think the things that will stay with us the longest are the things that help our frontline staff the most. We have to make people feel supported, safe, and have the information they need at their fingertips. So whatever we can put in place that helps people do that and report back from those frontline staff that will feed into the engine room back at head office, so that we then make the next move correctly based on information. There's too much strategic planning and stuff that goes on, which isn't sufficiently fed from the reality on the ground that I talked about earlier, to make it as meaningful and effective as possible, and thereby bring our staff along with us.
Yeah, brilliant sort of reminder about, you know, who we are here to support, really. So thank you very much, Jonathan. We'll come back and pick up some of those points during the panel session. But I now want to bring in the awesome Ben Denton, who's MD of L&G. And again, what we were keen to sort of L&G Affordable Homes, what I was keen to sort of try and bring into this sort of conversation was an external perspective. And as probably a lot of you have seen, is the amount of new providers coming in, for-profit providers coming into the sector, and increased by over 100% in terms of regulatory sort of registration. So this is a sector, we are in a sector now where there is huge interest in what we are doing for a number of different reasons. And I hope you enjoyed reading Ben's contribution as much as I did. So Ben, let's dive into that a little bit further. The screen is yours.
So I'm never ever called awesome. That only comes out of the Lego movies. So thank you, Ian, and thank you, Alistair, for the brilliant bit of research and all of the contributions from the organisations that provide their views on innovation and evolution of the sector. So I guess I'm here as a new entrant into the affordable housing sector. So I'll spend a little bit of time talking about what our model, how it's evolving, and where do we hope to get to, and particularly picking up the theme of sort of digital innovation or our technology platform. It feeds in really sort of neatly into the work that Jonathan's just talked about. So 1 minute about L&G and my business. So L&G is one of the world's top 10 investment managers. It's been going for about 185 years, so it has a great longevity, and obviously we're best known for being a pension and life insurance business. We have over 10 million customers, so we're a massive customer service business. 1 in 3 households is an L&G customer. So I'm the chief exec of our affordable housing business, and we take society's hard-earned pension fund cash. So if you've got an L&G pension, we take some of your pension fund money and invest it directly in the development, ownership and operation of affordable housing. So the returns that we generate effectively feed into your pension fund returns. The business has been operational for just over 3 years. I joined the business in 2018. We now have about 130 staff. And when I joined, I was given, I've got it on the shelf here, a big thick business plan, which was actually mainly regulatory stuff, and a little financial model, and that was it. So I started with a desk and a computer, and we are where we are today. So we've got just over 2,000 homes in operation today. We've got about further 5,500 in development. Our investment commitment just so far, so over 3 years, has been just over 1.8 billion. And we're growing at between 600 and 700 million pounds a year of investment into the sector. And I guess we've sized the business to be handing over about 3,200 affordable homes each year from 2024. So we're pretty much on track to deliver that. So what's our business model? We own, operate, and build affordable housing on a national geography. We have a brilliant network of 13 locally based housing management providers. Most of those are housing associations. The vast majority of them are leading organisations in the geographies that they're based in, and all of them are passionate with us to deliver great customer and property management services. And so whilst we're really passionate about delivering great customer service, the board of L&G wouldn't have let me set up this business without putting customer service as the #1 priority in our business. We're also really, really keen to see how we can accelerate the delivery of net zero carbon house building and reducing the cost of living in homes to our customers. But what I really want to focus on today is talking about our technology platform. We were really clear from the start in setting up the business. Our approach to technology was going to give us our competitive advantage if we got it right. And we wanted the way that we stored, manipulated, and used data to be our driver rather than our drag. So getting the approach to technology nailed continues to be a massively important issue for us. So if I just share my my slides now. So we're obviously building a digital frictionless business, and in considering our technology platform strategy, we looked at successful businesses delivering great customer service. So whether they're in the banking, customer service, white goods, or energy sectors. We knew the key to delivering well-managed business growth alongside great customer service was through building this digital frictionless technology platform. In a way, this is our fulfillment platform. If you think of a fulfillment platform, you know, Amazon is a fulfillment platform. It links together retailers, customers, and a supply chain to deliver things that people want to buy at the time that they want to receive them. So we link together our technology. Our fulfillment platform is linking together the landlord, the customer, the operatives, the suppliers, our managers, and our teams, and allowing all of those stakeholders to interact efficiently. Just as Jonathan's talked about, some of our ecosystem partners are organisations like FlixFlow, Plentific, and Viewber and Ask Porter, which are some of the organisations that Jonathan's already talked about. So we are using those organisations, but it's only possible to use them really efficiently by having a single source of data. So our single source of data is in Salesforce. We took the view quite early on when we built the business. We tried to look at housing management platforms and take something off the shelf, but we couldn't find anything that we thought was going to serve our future business needs. So we decided to build it ourselves, and that's what we've done. So one of the challenges, therefore, is we're building an affordable housing business, which is a customer services business, but we're also at the same time building a technology and customer services platform. And I would say half of the people in our business on a daily or a weekly basis are involved in the building of the platform that will deliver our future business needs. So delving into the detail in a little bit more detail. So our technology platform has been built on 12 modules. We're probably about 6 months off building the final module. So about 9 of them are in operation at the moment and being continually evolved. They're all specified by us, designed by our partner, rolled out, tested, and continually evolved. As I said, we use Salesforce, which is a Microsoft configurable technology. And our whole business is about building an end-to-end technology process where the process right the way through from bidding all the way through to a customer moving into a home, signing up, doing their onboarding checks and ordering repairs requirements all sit in a single system with a single source of data. We rely on third-party suppliers like FlixFlow, Plentific, Viewber, and Ask Porter. to provide some of the services alongside our management partners, our valuers, our employers agents, who all have access and input into the system that we operate. So that allows us to effectively create our ecosystem, and our management providers are a key part of that ecosystem. So as I've said, about 3/4 of the system is operational and goes through about 200 improvements a week. And a lot of those improvements are driven by the departments, or we call them sort of product areas within the business. Some bits of the businesses are ahead of others. So for example, sales and marketing is in a fabulous position, whereas other teams are still in the sort of evolution stage. So that all sounds rosy. But what are the challenges? So the biggest challenge for us is around the speed of skills shift and the future talent that we need to operate our future digital business. Don't get me wrong, we'll always need a core set of housing staff, skills, frontline people working with our management partners, development managers, customer care staff, housing officers, sales teams, finance and contract managers. But the business has built a technology platform that evolves really, really quickly. And so we see that there's an increasing need for a proportion of our business to be technology specialists, business analysts that can design and drive process improvements, design out friction and error, and in so doing, provide the backbone by which we can grow successfully and engage with our customers and suppliers to efficiently deliver the business strategy. So in what feels like 3 short years, we've gone from nothing to being a relatively large developer of affordable homes last year, and we'd expect to be in the top 5 by the end of this year, and probably the top 2 or 3 by the end of 2023. But that pace of evolution and growth requires constant change, and our technology platform, we rely on our technology platform to be really, really agile in supporting us to build the future business that we want to be part of, and ensuring that growth is as painless as possible. So it's that constant upskilling of the workforce that we need to make sure that our teams have the skills and capabilities to build the future business that we'll all be proud of. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ian.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. I know you do have to dash because you've got a board meeting to go to. So just a couple of quick questions whilst you sort of got here. Can I pick you up on when you were building this new organisation? What lens did you look at in terms of talent and skills that you were looking to attract? Did you recruit people from within the social housing sector, or did you pull them in from outside with the skills and then train them up through that lens? I'm just fascinated to sort of find out.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And there's always a question of whether what we did do was, with the benefit of hindsight, would we have done something differently? I guess the reflection is it's less to do with the skills of people. It's probably more to do with their aptitudes. So moving into a business that's, that is changing consistently requires a set of aptitudes where people are happy with uncertainty. They probably come from an entrepreneurial end of the spectrum. They're probably happy with not happy with uncertainty, but happy to cope with uncertainty, happy to work in a collaborative way and figure out ways to do things, happy to grab hold of an issue as a team and get on and do something and then seek approval rather than sitting in a position and waiting to be instructed. Probably now now one of our challenges is saying, how are we going to really invest in let's say in the core group of people that we've got, for example, to train them up so that they are really capable in specifying Salesforce. So how do we start to train up our current technical specialists, our subject matter experts in housing, and build additional skills into their suite of skills so that they can both understand the technical skills of housing, yet specify a digital business. So this is all about training. I think there was a great statement. We used a lot of work with Gartner, and one of their great statements was individuals only grow in terms of their capability if they know more tomorrow than they did yesterday. And so this point about how do we make sure that we're growing people's technical skills and capabilities so that they're even more skilled tomorrow than they were yesterday.
So one of the points you mentioned was you were looking to use data as a driver rather than a drag. And what is the early stage sort of data reports or analytics are you getting that you think, wow, you know, that has told me something that I didn't know? How are you finding that? Because I'm fascinated to find out. You know,
so just a couple of examples. So we price a lot of stuff in the country every single quarter. So roughly speaking, we bid about 16,500 homes a quarter through our development teams. So we have a pretty good, understanding of the price of everything that is affordable housing in the country. And we move our pricing around to win the right amount of stuff whilst not paying too much and not paying too little. So our reflection is, you know, I know we get blamed for pushing up market prices every once in a while, but we say, well, 92% of all organisations in the country pay more than us for affordable housing, and we see how much more. We don't get all data in terms of responses, but that's really helpful because it helps you understand what is happening in local markets. So the second thing for us for data is we have to value all of our properties once a quarter because we're a commercial organisation, and that is being automated. So because all of the data that you would need to value every single property with every single rent and every single Section 106 sits within the system. So our valuers can get in and see all of that data real time. You know, I think by the end of next year we will have the sort of AI to be reading through the documents to then pull out the data in relation to every single scheme. So we get fixated, for example, how many homes do we have that have recycling clauses in Section 106s? How many homes are EPC B or A? How many homes do we have that are in flood zone 3 areas that are not that don't have protection measures that give rise to environmental risk because we're thinking about homes for the next 50 to 100 years? So that's all the data that we need in our system. What it does do is it requires us to draw in lots and lots and lots of data right at the beginning of the development process. So it puts a big data drag or a need to load all that data in and check it's 100% correct right at the beginning of the process. So our development managers aren't just responsible for bidding and winning and building stuff. They're also responsible for making sure all the data that goes into the system is correct.
One of the points, and colleagues, if you just want to sort of post questions in the Q&A so I can sort of pick them up, we've got a couple in there. But one final question for yourself then, Ben, is around, you mentioned about the customer experience and you want to deliver a brilliant customer experience from. Well, the challenge we have within social housing is customers can't get up and move, you know, very easily sort of to another provider, a bit of a sort of a captive audience in that respect then. So where are you looking to enhance or, you know, deliver a brilliant customer experience beyond what we currently see within the sector?
Yeah, so I guess our current net promoter score is about 55. The average net promoter score for the sector is -12, I think, at the moment. So the average service sector score, the average score for service sector providers in the UK is about +27. So the sector has a long way to go, you know, to get up to be as good as other service sectors. It's really simple things like getting it right first time. You know, there's a really interesting YouGov poll that said, what was it, 30% of people had to ask their housing provider more than 10 times to ask for a repair to be done, and it either was or wasn't done. You know, that is, imagine if you had to do that for your phone company or your energy company. I think we just look at other sectors. So the energy sector used to be in a shocking position, and now is in a pretty good position, and that's been helped by disruptors like Octopus, who've come in. And Octopus, remembering, started off as an energy provider and now has become a technology retailer to some of the other energy providers to run their systems better. So that's where I talk about us. You know, are we an affordable housing business or are we a technology provider? We often contemplate that point to say, if we can help support the sector to accelerate service delivery, and it's just about getting it right first time, so that the activity was done at right first time by the operative who delivered a good service and the customer's happy.
Okay, thanks very much, Ben. So if you have got any questions for Ben, as you just have to pop off very, very shortly, but just sort of going through, we have got one question from Susan French, so I will ask that one. But good news, colleagues, for with Jonathan's point about toilets have not actually evolved massively. Thank you to Matthew Gardner for pointing out that actually there are some disruptive toilets out there which can separate out drinking water and fertilizer. See, your dear's been made there. So a question to Kate about the Livelihoods Ladder. Does Soha use the model in designing services, support, or working with individual residents?
Thank you. I think it can be used really well for both. So just a couple of examples. I think particularly for frontline support workers, working quite intensely with a few people, some of those tools can be incredibly helpful for people to describe their own experience of where they are and also why they're there and what it would take for their lives to become more secure. There's a link in the publication to our corporate plan. If you go to the back page of that, we used it as a way of scenario planning what we would do differently in 3 potential futures, because we wrote our corporate plan just over a year ago when it was all seriously uncertain what was coming next. So we literally used that to say, what do we do in a red mode? You know, if basically our country's falling to pieces, excuse the shorthand. What do we do if everything's gone back to normal really quickly? Where, you know, how does our ambition kick back in? And what does that middle ground look like? And one of the metrics we sort of keep in our head is that sort of how far ahead can you plan metric? You know, are we looking at what's the balance between short-term reactive response and long-term improvement and investment priorities? So that's sort of it at the other end of the spectrum. And in the middle, we talked to our members forum about whether or not they wanted us to start asking that as part of our sort of star survey type customer feedback mechanisms, alongside a broader conversation about the regulators' tenant satisfaction measures, and from their perspective as a forum to represent our residents and the members of Soha, what information is most useful for us to report to them in order for them to get a handle on our performance. So there's sort of three examples there.
Okay, thank you very much, Kate. One question to all three of you, again, before sort of Ben has to sort of disappear. What do you think are the things that we are no longer, organisations no longer should really be focusing, investing on, that actually you don't see as being a priority for the business or important to your tenants and residents in the future? Perhaps I can bring you on in that one, Jonathan, first. You know, what are the things we no longer need now? Just unmute your mic.
I don't know that I've got a ready answer to that. What don't we need any longer? Listen, I'm bound to say that people don't need lots more endless chit chat about what we already know to need changing. I mean, that's where my mind goes straight away. They need more action and less transformation plans and more fixing services. And getting out there and knocking on doors and talking to people. You know, I just can't bang this drum enough. And it's certainly a lesson that I learn almost daily or weekly with feedback from customer base and complaints and issues. So that's where my mind goes straight away, Ian, to be honest with you. No,
it's a really good point. And colleagues, if any of you watch any sort of Japanese police crime dramas, you will be familiar with the phrase Gemba. Gemba is the scene of the crime. This is what a lot of organizations actually use to identify where do you go. And as leaders, are you actually going to where the problems actually are? Do you really understand what they are? Or are we too far removed when we're making some of these big decisions around it? So, you know, are you making sure that you on a regular basis are going to where the scene of the crime actually is? Ben, from your perspective, what do you think are the things we should stop focusing on as much?
I think my reflection is when I arrived at sort of within L&G, we chatted a lot right across the business to say, well, how does L&G innovate in so particularly in the financial services sector, where organizations that exist today never existed 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. So to continue to be competitive, you've got to continue to innovate. You know, the market pressures are enormous in that space. And the learning point about, you know, if you've got a market you want to address or a problem you want to solve, go out to those innovative suppliers and create that solution with them through a really, you know, active creation journey. So that's my reflection is before you try and figure out a solution yourself, go out and have a chat with some of those really creative organizations and figure out whether someone can get to the answer much quicker and in a much more agile way than you can, because that's the way to be able to progress really, really quickly.
Yeah, and so something I would totally endorse, Ben, is, you know, we are more than just one sector. There are lots of other organisations out there, and ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, housing organisations as service providers, tenants and residents will judge you not against other landlords. I do not come across many comparing tenants who will look at other landlords. They'll be looking at the services and the experiences they receive from other service providers. Kate, from your perspective, what are you telling your team and organisation that actually that's less important now, this is more important to focus on?
So I'd echo what Ben says. I mean, I think that we've got a history of trying to do too many things ourselves as organisations, when actually there are partners better placed with better skills surrounding us who we can work with, and who are doing it at scale. So that would be my first thought. To add one extra, I think we need to recognise the limits of our own power. So I'm thinking particularly when we get very embroiled in disputes between neighbours, and what we have at our control is actually a tenancy agreement where you have to hit the criminal standard of proof to be able to act under that tenancy agreement. And that involves us being really clear about what we can and can't do and working with the partners who actually possess the statutory power to address the problem rather than over-promising.
Okay. And just before Ben, there's a question from Stephanie Good for yourself. For small housing associations with Albatross of legacy systems, what is the key piece of learning advice from your journey so far? You mentioned you couldn't get anything from any existing suppliers in the marketplace, so you're building your own. What would you share for Stephanie?
Unmute. So I tell you what really surprised us is the cost of what we've created is less than it would have cost to buy something off the shelf and configure it. So it is amazing what configurable systems didn't really exist like this 10 years ago. So that's the world that we live in, and our experience isn't different. You know, house builders look at the financial and technology systems that they operate off things like coins and say, well, actually Microsoft Dynamics is a much easier system to implement. And the minute you've got one of these systems, it's really easy to plug other things into it. So another example was we can get real, you know, we can credit score all of our customers instantly because of the nature of relationship between the data, the names, you know, and the addresses, because you can plug our system into Experian, we can plug our system into Dun & Bradstreet, so we can understand all of the risks associated with our contractors and have a real-time system of understanding the risks associated with counterparties. All of those things take 2 or 3 days to do rather than a year and £1 million. So you know, we're really keen to share what we've done with people to say, you know, it's not that difficult. The big challenge is taking data and putting it into the organization. But if that then becomes a business of taking data off old systems and putting it into new systems and cleansing it and making it correct, then actually we look at this and go, anyone could do what we're doing. It's just the transfer of data that you need to figure out at a third party provider to say, well, who's going to create the solution that does this in a really efficient way?
Okay, thanks, Ben. I mean, I think Jonathan mentioned it in his sort of presentation as well. Is there's a key piece, I think, as leaders you need to understand. There is a significant difference between digitization and digital transformation. Digitization will be where you'll take an existing manual process and you'll design it into an app and think you've done digital transformation. That is not digital transformation. So a question I suppose I asked Ben before, which I'm really keen to look at the people side of this, because culture came through a lot in the report, in the research. So where do you see the skills? What are the skills that we are going to need as a sector, Jonathan and Kate, this one, you know, in the future, that actually we're going to need less of those sort of skills? What are the type of people and roles do you think you would be looking to recruit through? Jonathan, can I bring that one to you first?
Yeah, I think that we definitely need people with more project management skills. And I say that purely because time and time again, I go into organizations and everyone is using Word, Excel, tables, different methods of trying to track the work they're actually doing, when there are such an array I've already inbuilt programs and software into our MS Office suite that we are simply not using or exploiting. So it makes it very difficult to track what everyone's doing. And if someone's off sick or leaves or whatever, the next person comes in and more or less starts from scratch. So there's very little carry on. So behind the scenes in the engine room, I definitely say our project management disciplines must be improved in order to manage the tasks. And then secondly, going back to the frontline staff, we are going to have to upskill our frontline staff in terms of understanding mental health, well-being in its purest senses. I've been an advocate for quite a while, and I'm looking at this again now, where I genuinely believe that a lot of housing organisations could well do with having clinical staff on their workforce, both in terms of servicing staff as well as residents, because quite honestly, our frontline staff are dealing with some very, very unwell people, but we're not in a position to make any kind of diagnosis on that and then adapt our service offering to them appropriately. Yet we're expecting ourselves to get it right and achieve our KPIs and satisfaction. It can't go on like that. We simply must have that skill amongst our workforce.
Yeah, really powerful point there, Jonathan. Thank you. Kate, what are you looking down in Soha in terms of future skills and talent?
In terms of what we know we're going to need more of from the technical side, IT. I mean, we're down the MS Dynamics route too, but the ability to actually design and use data is one. We're shifting our development portfolio towards doing more land-led work and more work in partnership with others from a very pure Section 106 programme, so there's a need there. And also retrofitting requires huge workforce. I mean, a workforce of people to do the work as well as a workforce of people to specify the work. So that's the third in terms of skills. More broadly, I mean, we're moving into locality teams. We're participating in a trial to look at self-managing teams and learn from Birdshock, which is coming up. But what that means is people who are more comfortable with making judgments. So people who are more comfortable with making decisions, exercising judgment in order to deliver a solution for a resident. And I think, to echo Jonathan's point, alongside that, I'm a huge believer in professional supervision. Social workers get space to basically deal with the emotional fallout of their work. The more you're asking people to make judgments rather than just implement a policy, the more people will feel responsible for the decisions they're making. They need to have proper space in which to be able to have that handled within a work context rather than need just to take it home for dealing with by partners and children and pets and everybody else around them. So I would absolutely echo that from Jonathan.
Okay, thank you. I will sort of come to the end of the webinar now, colleagues. I'm going to sort of see if Alistair's got any sort of final thoughts to sort of try and pull the whole sort of session together. Alistair, is there anything you've particularly picked up that we've missed during the questions or commentary?
Yeah, I find the whole thing very interesting. I mean, there's a lot of sort of back to basics thinking, isn't there? And there's a lot of sort of reconnection with customers, etc. It's interesting that the Rose diagram outcomes sort of cycle that Kate showed, that was invented by Florence Nightingale, and yet it still tells us something really pertinent about outcomes in business today. I thought it was also very interesting that what Ben was saying about making sure that your frontline teams are actively driving your improvement forward. He said something like 50% of people are involved actively in redesigning and moving their platform forward. Very interesting that. And equally, I think the need for partnership, understanding where you sit, how you deliver together, using other people where it's more appropriate. That's also key as well. So those are, I think, my three takeaways from this. Okay,
that's brilliant, colleagues. We've just posted the link for you. If you haven't already downloaded the full report, please do make availability of that and come back to us if you've got any questions. So all it remains for me to do is, if there's nothing else sort of being posted through, is sort of just pull it all together to thank everybody for their contributions today, to Jonathan, Ben, Kate and Alistair. To all of the backroom team, Rihanna and Zena at Campbell Tickell, who've made this go very, very seamlessly. And of course, to all of you delegates and attendees who've come on here. It's been so good to see so many of you stay right till the end. Thank you for all of your questions. I hope you've got some real good insights out of that. And please do come back to either Alistair or myself if you've got any further questions around this. And I do hope that what we can do is look forward to our next piece of thought leadership research and hopefully be equally challenging and informative with helping the sector improve and go forward. So thank you very much for your time, colleagues, and stay well. Thank you.